Hello, everybody. Come on in, grab a seat. Welcome to the Walrus Talks. My name is Shelley Ambrose. I'm the executive director and the publisher of the Walrus. Thank you for being, I bring my own little fan club with me everywhere I go, right over there. Thank you for being here at Globe and for coming to this special Globe event. There's a lot going on, we know, so we appreciate your choosing to be with us tonight. We are here in beautiful Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. There's a rich history of sharing and conversation here, and a very bright future as well. And the Walrus, if you know us at all, you know that we're all about the future. This optimistic little project called the Walrus, we're 28 people in a basement, as we like to say. We started 15 years ago, so this year is our 15th anniversary. And our overall goal is to create forums for conversations about Canada and its place in the world. So we do this through events like these, the Walrus Talks, through the Walrus magazine and at thewalrus.ca, where you can see lots of our journalism and our storytelling and so much more. So play a little game with me. Hands up if you read the Walrus. That is awesome. Don't lie to me. Hands up if you subscribe. My favorite people. Thank you, my people. Hands up if you've ever been to a Walrus Talks before. Welcome back, guys. Yay. Hands up if you're new. Let's welcome the new people. Thank you, new people. And hands up if you've ever been a Walrus Talker. I see some of you out there. There's one. There's another one. There's another one. Yay. Welcome, guys. And I didn't put you to work tonight. So that is good. So we started traveling the country with the Walrus Talks 7 years ago. Tonight is our 91st Walrus Talks event. And that means we have a lot of Walrus Talkers that you can watch on our YouTube video. We have an educational mandate, and that means we produce fact-based journalism. We didn't used to think we had to say that out loud because journalism meant fact-based, but now we have to tell you that. We have real live human fact checkers. There they are right now, working away in the basement at the Walrus, making sure that our facts are right. We believe in making a better Canada and a stronger democracy with the best ever informed citizenry. We also run a unique editorial fellowship program designed to ensure that the future of journalism at the Walrus and elsewhere is bright. There's no way we can do all of these things that we do without partners like Suncor. We actually launched this series called the Walrus Talks Energy with Suncor 5 years ago and have since had more than 65 Walrus Talkers talking about themes on energy, emerging technology, climate change, production and consumption, and the ongoing transition to a low-carbon energy future. This work is, of course, you're here, more important than ever before, and that's why it's so crucial for us to be part of Globe again, and why we're so grateful to Suncor for once again supporting tonight's Walrus Talks. There are some Suncor people here tonight. Where are the peeps from Suncor? Thank you all very much. Yay. We're also glad each of you is here because this kind of conversation is vital to all of us. And a chance to, we think at the Walrus that your mind is like a parachute. It works marginally better when open. And if you are here, we think you all believe that too. So you all have something in common, so welcome. Now here's how the Walrus Talks works. Each talker has 7 minutes. They know this. Each will come up and introduce themselves. You have a program in your hand. It's in speaker order. If you want to know more about each talker, you can flip it over. Their bios are on the back. They will introduce themselves. You will see and hear 7 talkers in a row. And then afterwards, at the post-talks reception, which happens over there where it's dark and light will happen, the post-talks reception where there will be food and drink, we'll all have a lot to talk about. So just before I let them get underway, I'd like to thank each in advance. Thank you to, from Calgary, author and strategist and Walrus writer Chris Turner. Thank you to the Director of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Ministry of Natural Resources Canada, Cheryl Cardinal. Thank you to from Yellowknife and now Vancouver, the research and project coordinator of the Gathering Voices Society, Colton Kasteel. Thank you to the Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada, BC's Merran Smith. Thank you to the Executive Director, Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, joining us from Calgary, Leor Rotchild. And in from Toronto, thank you to the Chair and CEO of NRStor Inc, Annette Verschuren, although I should say she's really from Cape Breton, but she'll probably tell you that herself. Newly minted member of the Order of Canada. Congratulations. And thank you to the founding managing partner, Global Acceleration Partners, and former Walrus talker, the guy who introduced the clean tech concept to the world, Nick Parker. Thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Good evening. I'm Chris Turner, and I am going to talk to you this evening about the global energy transition. And in particular, I am going to talk about the pace of the global energy transition, which makes this inevitably a conversation about the future. When we talk about this transition, we tend to talk about targets and rates of change, about what's happening in 2030 and 2050. And so what winds up happening is we tend to imagine futures that are much simpler than this crazy, complex present that we all live in. It's a bit like old school science fiction, if you'll bear with me. It tends to channel itself into two very different and equally simplistic and inaccurate models of the future. This is the first version. You remember that cheesy, old school sci-fi future, everything's clean and white and gleaming. We're all in matching jumpsuits, color-coded by occupation. Our ultimate target in this energy transition is somewhere as close to zero emissions as we can get, as fast as we can get. And so that tends to lead to a sort of jumpsuit thinking, you know? Fossil fuels have been banished, everything's clean and green, Mr. Spock is talking to humpback whales, all that stuff. And so if that is, you know, the upside of our energy transition, the downside must be its opposite, right? That must be the other option. Fail to act, don't move fast enough, and it's hellish desert landscapes and roadside cannibalism for the lot of us. Now, I'm not going to talk very much tonight about these hellscapes, but I'm sure you've all seen enough, you know, recent weather disaster news that it needs no further explanation or introduction. But when has the world ever been that simple? Isn't it more likely that whatever that future looks like, it's going to look a lot like the current mess plus some weird set details? Now, this, by the way, is Marty McFly of the Back to the Future movies in 2015, and it was conceived about 30 years ago. It's not perfect. It didn't get it exactly right, but it is actually a whole lot closer than jumpsuits, a whole lot closer than hellscapes to what we actually live in. And so 30 years from now, isn't the world way more likely to look like the same old mess plus a hoverboard or two? Isn't that kind of a more plausible scenario? Even if things do go much worse for us than they did for Marty McFly, even still, even if it's a dark, rainy, kind of Bladerunner kind of landscape, odds are you'll still be able to at least get a decent bowl of soup. It will be, you know, there will be a recognizable human existence in there somewhere. My point here is that it does matter how we talk about the energy transition and about where it's going. And as that transition becomes unstoppable, it matters that we try to avoid this kind of hyperbole, this kind of simplistic thinking. It won't be matching jumpsuits. It probably won't be Mel Gibson in the desert. So let's try to get it right. Now, I am a little bit guilty of what you might call matching jumpsuit thinking. I have written 2 books on this global energy transition from the very early days when it felt necessary to describe this very rosy future. 8-10 years ago when I was first working on it, it seemed like, you know, we needed a bit of hype. But we've come a long way in 10 years, and we maybe don't need quite as much hype anymore. And in the meantime, I've been writing a lot about the hard, complex part of this transition. These aren't hellscapes in these books. These are stories much more about people who are wary of the enormous amount of uncertainty about abandoning the status quo for something new, and that's totally understandable. This energy transition we're in the midst of now is huge. It will take decades. It can seem scary, and it's okay to talk about it that way. Because the thing is, it can cause problems to talk too much about the matching jumpsuit future. It can make it really hard to understand where we actually are in the energy transition and how fast we are going. And that it will take some really, really hard choices and concessions and trade-offs to get where we want to go. I mean, just consider all this. You look at all this stuff, don't try to read them all. On one level, this is hugely exciting. This transition I'm talking about is clearly well underway now. It's going faster than anyone expected even a few years ago, and it does feel inevitable now, and that's awesome. But, in all that excitement, the hype and conjecture can get mixed up with the truth, and this is one example of this. I was touring the country last fall, talking about the oil sands, talking about my book about the oil sands, and everywhere I went, people wanted to talk about this one study that said there'd be no more gas-powered cars in like 10 years. And so what's the big deal about that? What's the risk in that? Well, I was on a panel at one point, and there was this very well-regarded political thinker on the panel with me, and he's telling the crowd, you know, Canada shouldn't be doing a thing in terms of investment in its oil and gas infrastructure because we'll all be driving electric cars in 10 years. And said it that baldly, like no qualifications, this is happening, folks. And I suddenly was the guy going, wait a minute, that's one study. It's not even a very good study, frankly. And that's just the danger of jumpsuit thinking, is it makes the process look way too easy, way too fast. And if I were to move on deeper into the Canadian context today, we'd soon be talking about oil sands and LNG terminals and carbon taxes and all that stuff, and I bet we'd soon be at each other's throats and not listening to each other anymore. We might lose sight of the point I want to make about the pace of energy transitions and the messiness of energy transitions, so let's go to some neutral ground instead. Let's all go to Costa Rica just for a minute. Why? Well, it's a great time of year to go to a place like Costa Rica, for one thing. But much more than that, it is one of those jumpsuit places. Costa Rica has become one of these places we point to and say, you know, we could solve this thing, you know, in a decade if we wanted to. And the reason we say that about Costa Rica is because they have, in fact, almost entirely eliminated fossil fuels from their grid. 100% renewables almost on their grid, and certainly for days on end, that's all they use. But that is relatively easy to do in a small, not very heavily industrialized nation that gets a ton of rain, is extraordinarily hilly. Converting all that to hydropower was not some sort of grand, you know, generation-long energy transition. That said, it is a genuine accomplishment. You can understand that Costa Ricans want to brag a little bit about it now. But even then, I think it is important to get the details right. This, for example, is what greets you at the airport in the capital of San Jose. Alongside the fact that they have no military, they're now saying 100% renewable energy runs this country. And it's like, hold on, guys, 100% renewable energy runs your grid. You are not 100% renewable in everything you do. In fact, 70% of your emissions now come from the transport sector. And the transport sector is a mess in Costa Rica, and here's why. This is, if you don't know it, this is what Costa Rica looks like. Pretty much 3/4 of the population all jammed into that central valley there that you can see. And basically every single day, business as usual looks a lot like this. There is not a single non-internal combustion engine way to get around in any kind of significant number in Costa Rica. And so when they're talking about 100% renewables, they're not talking about how they're driving. Now, to be fair, because they are a progressive country, they have begun to look into what would, you know, a 100% green transportation future look like, and they went and built themselves a nice little commuter train system. And so I was there recently and decided, let's check out how the train system's going. It's quite cheap. You can get a ticket, and you can take the train. And there is, let me be clear, a train. This is where they've gotten to 12 years down the line. They started working on this in 2005, starting to think through their traffic problem. They have a single line. It goes from a number of suburbs into the city center and back again. It's almost literally just a single train back and forth. Doesn't go very fast. Doesn't go very, very pleasantly, but they do, in fact, have a train. Now, the thing about this is the hard part for them. This is the extraordinarily difficult part. They've set targets for, you know, electric vehicles and the rest of it, but the really heavy lifting, if you're in Costa Rica, is going to be solving this dependence on private automobiles, private buses, basically all the stuff that we know is kind of the wrong way to go at solving a transport problem in this energy transition. Now, if you talk to the Costa Rican government, they'll say, you know, they're planning to build more LRTs and the rest of it, but in the meantime, this is as far as they've gotten. They've got one train, and then they have this mess. And that is, you know, this is not matching jumpsuit terrain. In fact, this is the sole available infrastructure for getting on and off the train in the middle of the largest city in Costa Rica. And the reason it still looks like this is because they've already done the low-hanging fruit. They are now into the really, really hard part of the energy transition, and that's going to be the tough part, and people are going to fight, and they're not going to like some of the choices. If you want to draw any analogies between their situation and Canada's relationship with its oil and gas sector, I would not dissuade you from doing that. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to recognize that this event is happening on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Thank you to David Leonard and Walrus Talks for the inclusion of my voice in this very important discussion. My name is Cheryl Cardinal. I just joined the Office of the Minister of Natural Resources as the Director of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. Prior to holding this position, I was President and CEO of the Indigenous Center of Energy, which worked with Indigenous people globally. I was not asked to speak with you today about my current position, but rather my experience with Indigenous people. I am Cree and Coast Salish and a citizen of the Sucker Creek Cree Nation in Alberta. I'd like to take this time to recognize my family on this coast, as my grandparents were from Sartlip and Saneema. I am a mother, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and an aunt. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, please close your eyes. Picture yourself as a child looking at the world, or a parent looking at the wonder of the child in your arms. Remember what that felt like. What hopes and dreams do you have for that child, for their future? Now open your eyes. When we look at Indigenous people, when we look at Indigenous perspectives on energy, everyone would like to believe that there's only one perspective. It makes it easier to think that way. As Indigenous people, we have 634 First Nations across this country, approximately 500,000 Métis people with land bases in the province of Alberta, 53 Inuit communities representing 60,000 Inuit people. Our perspectives are as diverse as our people. We share a connection to our ancestors, to our culture, our languages, our traditions of our people, and our shared history. We have worked hard within our communities to create success for ourselves and for our nations. We can look at communities such as the Fort McKay First Nation in Alberta, who are contributing to the greater Indigenous workforce, since creating opportunities for their nation, their members, and their businesses. They have recently signed an equity deal with Suncor Energy Tank Farm. They have diversified their business portfolio to be involved in a number of opportunities. The community of Souk on Vancouver Island has reached success with their focus on solar energy. The nation has taught about solar energy in their schools, so their next generation will know what is key to their community. We can focus on a number of partnerships with the energy sector where there have been increased opportunities for our people. What do all of these opportunities have in common? Each community has actively defined what success means to them. I was fortunate to spend time in Northern Canada, in the Sahtu region, in the Northwest Territories, speaking to their communities about shale gas and hydraulic fracturing. Traveling with other First Nations to discuss and help the Sahtu region understand how those communities came to the decisions in their respective communities. I visited Norman Wells, Delaney, Toledo, Fort Good Hope. We invited Colville Lake into the sessions. And I believe in accessibility of information, so I worked with translators to translate everything into Dene, their language. We spoke about opportunities and challenges to their proposed development. The youth were very engaged in the discussions, participating and asking key discussions. These conversations with the communities were not easy. The focus for these communities was envisioning their future, in moving their communities. Leadership actually, in one of our sessions, disagreed on what their vision was moving forward. To diffuse the situation, leadership got up and left the meeting. I remember kind of going to the translator and going, okay, the person that I'm supposed to speak to just left, so what do I do? Should I stop? Should I continue? What are the expectations of me in your community? And he looked at me and he told me, as long as those 9 elders wanted to ensure that the conversation continued, and as long as they sat there It is your job and your responsibility here to continue those conversations. Now, I remember thinking, this is interesting. I'm not really sure how to proceed here, but let's go with it. They reminded everyone in attendance that they were the people of the Sawtoo. And I remember thinking to myself how lucky I was in that moment to listen to the guidance of the elders. They also reminded the community that everyone had a relative in each of the other communities. So the focus for them must be on the benefits of the people of the Sawtoo region, because they were all related. Each one of these communities had a different geographic location. Each one had relatives in each of the communities, and each approached the discussion to think about what was best for their people. Do we have successful communities? Successful people? Absolutely. I only highlighted 2. There are many across this country. What we also need to realize is we should be raising the bar for all of our people, all of our communities. As I started the discussion, I said that I was a mother. I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, girls. And when my oldest was 8, she decided she wanted to be a hydrogeologist. Like any great parent, I gave her a big hug, told her that was fantastic, and she skipped up the stairs immediately. I truly mean immediately. I pulled out my computer to find out what a hydrogeologist was. She decided that she wanted to focus on access to safe drinking water in First Nations communities. My mom reminds us every time that we go home that we must not drink the tap water, as she remembers being sick with E. coli. One of her concerns is she doesn't want her children or her grandchildren to get sick. What did this do to my family? It inspired action. It inspired a career path and understanding that she needed help to realize her dream. At 16, she's well on her way, and I'm a proud mom of both of my girls. And I reached out to my network for help. I focused on technical information to expand her knowledge, to be mentored by those who are working in the field, and opportunities for her to get hands-on experience in testing water. She realized what success looked like to her by understanding the issues. She can improve things for our people, for our community, and most importantly, her grandmother. We, as Indigenous people, need to dream. We need to envision and plan for our future. We should define what success looks like to us, remember the guidance and wisdom of our elders, and help youth envision the path forward. Thank you.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Colton Castile. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm humbled to be among such an accomplished, insightful group of panelists, and I thank them all for their great work. To echo the current acknowledgements of the Coast Salish Peoples territory, I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by climate change, and it's critical that any solution that we take, energy or otherwise, stands in solidarity with them and respects their rights to free, prior, and informed consent, and the values of traditional knowledge. In my brief time with you, I'd like to talk about 2 groups who I feel are underrepresented in the climate policy formulation space, but must be at the forefront of any future actions we take: Indigenous peoples and youth. To begin, I'd like to talk about the importance of Indigenous inclusion and why I believe that traditional knowledge is so critical to the development of climate policy and ultimately energy policy. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted over 10 years ago, and with the key role that the Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities Knowledge Platform plays in the Paris Agreement, traditional knowledge has never had a better time to be recognized in policy. We've seen its recognition with the 2018 suspension of commercial roe herring fisheries in BC by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and with the adoption of the new Canadian Energy Regulator. We've also seen it across the world, in Australia, with the immensely successful and newly reinvested capacity building for Indigenous Ranger strategy. Leveraging traditional Indigenous knowledge must be a central pillar of climate policy, Indigenous peoples offer an incomparable wealth of knowledge related to sustainable land and resource management. Throughout my work, I've come to view the model of payments for ecosystem services as one of the most innovative and intersectional market transactions. We know that to accomplish the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and reach our Paris Agreement targets, we must adopt policies and initiatives that aim to tackle multiple issues at once. Stewardship arrangements with Indigenous peoples, both public and private, accomplish this. By creating policy arrangements that compensate First Nations for stewardship of their land, we are building sustainable, green jobs for First Nations, re-empowering First Nations, both spiritually and economically, generating positive economic impacts for local communities and businesses that depend on the health of local natural resources, biodiversity, and land. In economics, we often talk about the willingness to pay of consumers for a good or a service. The basic notion is that natural market demand and supply often determine the accurate price of that good or service, recognizing that the impacts of all inputs or production processes are accurately accounted for in that price. But we know this not to be fully accurate, and market-based solutions to climate change respond to this by centering upon the basic recognition of externalities, how some goods, such as those intensive in greenhouse gas emissions, are not priced to accurately reflect their repercussions on consumers. Payments for ecosystem services by Indigenous peoples follow a similar premise. We simply recognize that Indigenous peoples offer a competitive advantage or higher productivity when it comes to land management services. And businesses, governments, and residents have a willingness to pay for those services. A great example is the benefit these programs can offer tourism-dominated economies. Private sector companies who rely on the pristine nature of their surrounding environment to export tourism experiences benefit economically from these arrangements. Municipalities benefit from the co-management of public sector resources, such as watersheds, and residents benefit from the ensuing economic growth, as well as biophilia. I've been fortunate enough to travel with some incredible academics to Clayoquot Sound, where we've witnessed encouraging steps to realize these benefits between regional stakeholders. And we aim to expand Canada's already growing community of Indigenous guardians. In sum, developing climate leadership plans, and of course, energy plans, must include the invaluable services that Indigenous peoples can provide when developing both adaptation and mitigation measures. It's not just the smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do. Now, switching gears, I'd like to talk a bit about youth. When I think about youth engagement in climate policy and energy policy, I foresee a near future where young leaders are driving the narrative and goals of private and public sector action. Our young innovators are thriving like never before. Advancing the development of long overdue youth policies are key to continuing this, but progress cannot halt there. Domestically, youth are leading marches, starting companies and NGOs, and unrelenting in their calls for more ambitious action on climate change. In the international climate diplomacy space, I've witnessed young people reject complacency and commit to being drivers of change. International initiatives like Action for Climate Empowerment, otherwise known as Article 6 of the UN Convention on Climate Change, as well as YOUNGO, the UN Youth Constituency, are examples of the initiatives that have recognized youth empowerment and education as critical to climate solutions. But these are just the tipping point. We must take it a step further. Investing in and empowering youth of today is a win-win. Young leaders can provide government, NGOs, and private sector businesses with immense human capital to come up with innovative, ambitious solutions to energy, policy, and economic challenges. So what happens next? This is about energy and the energy choices we make today. The questions of energy developments often come up being a question of weighing the well-being of future generations over the consumption of today's. We need to price carbon. We need to mobilize both public and private sector finance for adaptation and mitigation. But most importantly, we must evaluate climate change on a horizon and discount it at a rate appropriate for the security and prosperity of future generations. Climate change is the greatest issue of our generation, and energy policy will dictate that. It disproportionately affects youth, Indigenous communities, the poor, and developing nations. We must advocate for solutions that center and empower marginalized populations rather than ask that they accept incremental process. To conclude, I ask that those involved in developing today's energy policies commit to an approach that includes these voices and truly safeguards our children, our children's children, and the many future generations to come. It's not about us, it's about them. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Merran Smith, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Coast Salish for sharing their traditional territory with us here tonight. 3 million. That's about how many electric cars are cruising the roads around the world tonight. Well, maybe not cruising tonight, but on the roads today. So I'm curious, anybody here own an electric vehicle or is thinking that their next car will be an electric vehicle? Put your hands up high if that's what you're thinking. So I encourage you to take a look around. We wouldn't have seen that kind of participation just 5 years ago. Now 300 million, that's how many electric cars are projected to be on the roads in about 25 years. And that forecast comes from BP's Energy Outlook. And they're not the most bullish. As Chris was saying, they don't wear the white jumpsuits. They're moderate. They're in about the middle as to what they see coming. Now, BP's also projecting that by 2040, we'll have about 2 billion cars on the road. And that's twice as many cars as what we have right now. And they're projecting that we'll still be using the same amount of oil and gas. So that means that we're going to see more electric vehicles, but also more fuel-efficient vehicles. We're going to see more biofuels. And that's why we're going to double the cars, but still be using the same amount, the same demand for oil. Now, if you're a producer of oil, such as us here in Canada, that's cause for concern. As the CEO of Shell put it, societal acceptance of the energy system as we have it is disappearing. And that's why Shell is transitioning. They're investing about $1 billion a year now in renewable energy. They're buying car charging companies, solar companies, energy efficiency companies. And it's not just Shell. Statoil, BP, Total, they're all investing and transitioning to this clean energy future. So this transition that we're talking about, it's not just a shift in supply and demand. What we're talking about is an overall transformation. So think back, think about the internet and what that did for communications. We really can't imagine life without it. Who here in the hour before they got here, who checked Twitter or Facebook? Actually, I'm not going to ask you to show hands. You all know who you are. But that's the level of change I'm talking about. It's exciting, it's bringing opportunities, and it's disruptive. So in the world of energy, the biggest disruptor we have, not surprisingly, is China. Now, air quality is driving China's mind-boggling uptake of wind, solar, electric vehicles. I mean, I can give you stats like 40% of global energy, clean energy investment last year, or roughly half of personal electric vehicles sold last year. You got it, China. But China's goals aren't just environmental. They're strategic and they're economic. China sees clean energy technologies as major industrial exports that can compete with American and Russian oil and gas. They want to position themselves as the clean energy superpower as the world shifts away from oil and gas. So China is all in on this clean energy future. Another disruptor that I want to talk about is electric vehicles. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the media about electric cars, but how many Canadians know about electric delivery trucks, or electric school buses, or electric ferries, or electric cargo ships? All of these exist or are in operation today. And so when we talk about oil displacement, usually the focus is on what's going to happen with cars. But electric cars are just the beginning. So big global brands, they are going to be one of the bigger new drivers of this energy transformation. 122 of the world's biggest and most successful companies are now choosing 100% renewable energy. So Google, the world's biggest corporate buyer of clean energy, reached 100% renewables for all their global operations last year. Last week, Visa joined the club of those committing to be 100% renewable. So brands like these, they have way more impact than any report that I can put out, than any tweet you can put out, any announcement the government can do. They have more impact on citizens because their commitment to 100% renewables tells Canadians this clean energy transition is real, that it's happening right now, that it's possible. And that's going to have a huge change for the citizenry in terms of where they go and their buy-in. So the last disruptor I want to talk about is smart energy. At Netflix and Wikipedia, they proved that you don't have to have a physical space to have a library. And that's also true for power plants. And Australia is soon going to be home to the world's biggest virtual power plant, which will digitally connect solar panels and Tesla batteries installed in more than 50,000 homes. So it's going to be able to store excess energy across those homes and businesses for when it's needed, even when the sun isn't shining. So the digitalization of energy is what I think of as the secret sauce that's going to make this energy transition different and faster than any previous transition. So why is that? Because it isn't just changed. It's not a swap out of hardware, but it's going to be fueled by the power of software. So the exciting part of all this transformation and disruption for me is that we aren't too late. And Canadians and Canadian companies have already started to be part of this energy transition. So let's just take a look at a few companies. Ballard and Hydrogenics, Canadian companies that make fuel cells that convert hydrogen into clean electricity. They're two of the top dogs in their emerging sector, and they're signing contract after contract in China and elsewhere. Or Lion Bus in Quebec, Green Power Bus here in BC. They're building electric school buses with customers in the US, China, and that electric ferry I mentioned, it may be in Norway, but guess who supplied its batteries and charging stations? Corvus Energy, right here in Richmond. So there's already 300,000 clean tech jobs in Canada now. And while it's no secret that our economy relies on export, more than 85% of Canada's clean tech companies already identify as export-focused. And that's without our country going all in and saying that we're going to get this sector off that ground. So if this surprises you, it may be because today's energy jobs don't look like yesterday's. They're diverse, they're all across Canada, and they include all kinds of skilled Canadians. People like Ashley, insulator, retrofitting homes in BC, or Gordon Planis, chief of the Suit First Nation, leading the way with solar installations in his community. Or Alvia, an engineer turning Edmonton's waste into fuel. And people like Pierre, a former oil and gas worker, now with a world-leading clean tech company in Montreal. We're at the beginning of an economy-wide transformation, one for the history books. And the question is, what will Canada's story be? So here's my pitch. Let's be deliberate. Let's be clear-eyed about the challenges and the opportunities. Let's embrace this transition and be part of the Leaders Club. That's the Canada I want to build. And that's the story that together we need to write for our kids to be proud and to be prosperous for decades to come. Thanks.
I'm Leor Rotchild. I don't know what's on your bucket list, but for me, it was visiting all of Canada's 13 provinces and territories. 3 years ago, my wife Kate and I got to check off that on our bucket list during a 6-month journey that took us from Kitimat to Fort Mac, from Iqaluit to Sherbrooke, from Membertou to Corner Brook, and many more amazing places. We wanted to explore what it means to be Canadian, and in the process, learn a great deal about our country's incredible diversity. And no matter where we went, regardless of whether it was pipelines or turbines, rail lines or cut lines, it was abundantly clear that Canadians have strong and differing opinions on the subject of energy. Conflict Management 101 tells us that the key to finding common ground among people with different worldviews is to return to our base values that we can all agree on. So what do we all agree on? Well, when talking to Canadians, Sports is a good place to start. We know what it looks like when we all win as Canadians. And we want to do good in the world, so we have some idea of what it looks like to help like a Canadian. When we celebrate our culture, we have an increasing awareness of the deep roots and influences that shape how we celebrate as Canadians. And we have many heroes who remind us what it is to explore like a Canadian. But what does it mean to do business like a Canadian? This is an important question to answer because when we fail to answer this for ourselves, we leave it to others to define us for us. And when you live next door to the greatest myth-making society in the history of the world, it's easy to believe what's said about us. Oh, those Canadians, they're very polite, a little timid, not very entrepreneurial. And they're always saying sorry. What if we took our identity back? What if we articulated loudly and proudly, not just the values for who we are, but also the aspirations for where we're going as an influential global economy and a sustainable society? What are Canadian business values? CBSR led a series of focus groups and conversations with youth leaders and business professionals, government representatives, and not-for-profit advocates, and we started to find out. And these values describe a society that prioritizes purpose above maximizing profits, and a philosophy of ethical behavior, not get rich or die trying. In a world that desperately needs globally minded citizens, not nativists, innovation, not just incrementalism, collaboration, not winner takes all, inclusion, not assimilation, gender equality, not supremacy, and environmentalism, not just more consumerism. When I worked in the oil and gas industry, many people asked me about the link between our actions and our share price. And it was a really difficult question to answer. But today, that link is abundantly clear. Earlier this year, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink wrote an open letter to CEOs of Fortune 500 companies to say that if you can't articulate the positive contribution you're making to society, then there's a good chance your business soon won't exist. And therefore, you're not a safe investment for our $6 trillion. BlackRock's only one of many investors who are collectively channeling $23 trillion towards companies that are demonstrating strong business values backed by demonstrable results. But doing business like a Canadian isn't just about attracting investment. It's about attracting trust. Imagine how much better it would be to build infrastructure in this country with the trust that world-class companies are using world-class standards to not only build in the national interest, but to do so with local community support that's truly earned through meaningful impact. There may be critics, but this is a really important message to share. We want to share the message that Canada is open for business, yes, but know that doing business like a Canadian is a little different here. And it probably can't be managed out of a regional office in Houston or New York. Similarly, doing business like a Canadian is a message for homegrown companies that we want you to go out into the world and carry business values that we can all be really proud of. There may be critics who say these aren't the right business values, or they're not distinctly Canadian, or Canada isn't currently doing enough to meet these. Well, it is very Canadian to be our own worst critics. And that's okay, because this is just the start of a conversation. CBSR is launching a national public engagement campaign to unite Canadians around a common set of business values and to celebrate what it means to do business like a Canadian. We're collecting stories of these values and actions, such as the one from Keurig Canada, who reached their goal to bring a fully recyclable single-serve coffee product onto the market a full 2 years ahead of their target date. Their parent company asked them to share with the rest of the global corporation exactly how they did this. And how did they do it? They innovated using RFID technology and collaborated with recycling facilities across the country. Another great example, homegrown energy giant Enbridge, who understood it's not enough to invest in early leak detection technologies for their facilities. Rather, through collaboration with their competitors, they were able to combine resources, use drones, and cover a lot more ground in order to detect pipeline integrity issues at any of those sites. And if a concern is raised, they all work together to resolve it. They did this because they realized it's not enough to be a clean fish in a dirty pond. We have to clean up the whole pond. And the way to do that is to move beyond competition and collaborate in order to get it to a cleaner ecosystem for all. There are many more great examples of Canadian businesses and these values in action. We need your help to identify great Canadian stories and Canadian business heroes. And we need you to share them using the hashtag #DoBusinessLikeACanadian. Join the campaign. Let's shine a light on the business stories and heroes that we can be proud of. And let's define for ourselves what it means to do business like a Canadian.
Hi, my name's Annette, and I too want to acknowledge and thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to gather today on their unceded territory. Understanding our history and connection to the land is so important. I grew up on a farm in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Yes, Cape Breton comes up pretty quickly. Yes, I learned a lot on that beautiful island, and I still do call it home. When I was a little girl, I was 11 years old, my father had a heart attack, and he was a dairy farmer. And I want to talk to you about an example of how I learned about sustainability at a very young age. So the kids were all young, and so we all had to work on the farm, and it was hard work. And he wanted to find ways, because he couldn't physically work anymore, find ways to take the labor out of the farm. So he decided that one of the toughest things to manage on a dairy farm, particularly back in those days, was shit. And shit was very heavy, and for children it was very, very difficult. So he found a way to put a toilet at the end of the farm, and we would flush water down those gutters and put it into a big pit, and the pit would be stirred, and he would deliver shit all year round on our farm. And that did a number of things. It reduced the costs of running the farm. It improved the productivity of running the farm. He didn't have to buy fertilizers like they did in the past. And I learned as a very young girl how, when you look at things in the longer term and sustainability, how things can really make a difference. The government wouldn't give him a farm loan for this. We had to find the money in other places. And it's still hard to innovate today. But my connection to the land has always been so important. Someone mentioned member two. So Chief Terry Paul is a great friend of mine, and they're one of the most successful employers in all of Cape Breton Island. They're building hotels and all kinds of wonderful business facilities in the middle of the city of Sydney. And what I have learned all of my life in my career is that we need to look at things in the longer term. And my connection to the land translated into the way I run my life. And I'll tell you, it started at that very beginning, but I've always prioritized sustainability throughout my career. I remember, I don't know whether Linda Cody's here today, but many years ago when I was running Home Depot, I was the chair of the Environmental Council. And the Indigenous peoples particularly impacted Home Depot. And they just were not happy with the way many of the wood extractors were managing and sustaining the lands that they had responsibility for. And it was a very difficult time. And I convinced Arthur Blank at the time, and a bunch of us did, that let's use the purchasing power of purchasing product to really change the way people were going to be extracting and harvesting from our lands. And so Home Depot said to all our vendors around the world, North America, look, third-party certification is a way for us to ensure that this product is going to become more, the responsibility of managing and stewarding our forests are really going to change. And we did this. I went to all the vendors and I said, look, give you 2 years. You're going to lose, and we did. We had to stop a number of, we had to stop purchasing from a number of wood fiber vendors. But you know what? Immediately, it made a change. And so the power of that purchasing power influence was so extraordinarily important to change the way woodlands have been managed and harvested throughout our world. But look, it was the Indigenous people that pushed us. It was companies that responded, it was governments involved. But, you know, again, and everybody says, oh my God, the costs of wood products are going to go up. It didn't happen. You know, when you become efficient and sustainable, you become innovative and you find better ways to produce your product or extract and harvest that product. Innovation is key to the success of Canada. So after I left Home Depot in 2011, and I went around the world with my husband to figure out what I was going to do next. And so we had a bucket list of 17 countries, many developing countries. But what I discovered is that, you know, we found a way to store food. We found a way to store water. But the thing that we didn't know how to store as a society was energy. And it was that basic. I just saw food, energy, and water are the three of the most fundamental things to sustain our society. But I saw that this was a real opportunity. And so I created NRStor. And NRStor is a company that is a developer of energy storage projects. We're working with technologies that, oh my God, it's 51 seconds left, I'm sorry. Let me tell you, the working in technologies to really drive change in performance. So what we're doing is we're enabling homeowners to take control of their own energy with residential batteries. We've done the deal with Tesla. We're helping commercial and industrial customers better manage their carbon footprint and reduce energy costs. And that's very exciting. Behind the meter, we're helping all heavy industry users to reduce their peaking requirements and therefore reduce costs. We've developed business models that are really quite exciting. Had to get my money from the Swiss. Someday the Canadian banks will support these evolving industries. Yes, we have to change this. We're enabling grid operators to better manage their systems. We have a flywheel installation from Temporal Power, a great Canadian company. HydroStore is another company. We are about to build the first commercially backed fuel-free compressed air project in the world. It's on top of a cavern in Ontario and Goderich. And it's very exciting. It's for long-term energy, and again, it's Canadian technology. And we are working with off-grid Indigenous communities in the north and all throughout Canada. I really believe that the transformation of the energy sector will be led by the Indigenous community. You can't imagine the number of renewable projects happening across our country today. And it's so encouraging to see that, and I think this industry will be led by the Indigenous people and really become leaders in this sector. And I am so excited about doing deals with them, recognizing that they have got to be owners and determining their own destiny in the opportunities that they have. I am having so much fun. I've been in business for 41 years, started in a coal mining company, and haven't I come full circle? Here I am in the energy storage business, but I have lived through amazing evolution in the energy and electricity markets. And, there's some wonderful stories. In Ontario, everybody hates the wind turbines. In Nova Scotia, my brothers invested in the wind turbines. There was a community ComFit program that was extraordinarily successful. And it was just unbelievable to see people participate. When the turbines stop moving, Nova Scotia Power is called because the community is owning these facilities, and there's no complaints about how beautiful they are. But look, this personal connection to energy is something that I'm so excited about. I think Canada has a unique moment. We have a unique moment to really drive and transform the energy market. Look, these cost-effective technologies, they're there, they're making money, we can install them, and it's so exciting. But you know what? It's time to take action. I really believe that we can't analyze this thing much more. We just got to start doing it. And, I have a belief that mediocre strategy and great execution can really make things happen. I'm someone that goes forward faster, and then I work back to fix it, and it really works. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nicholas Parker. I'm legally blind, so if I stumble through my notes, forgive me. I'm also unemployable, which means I'm an entrepreneur. I like to declare my biases as I get going, and I'll share a few of them tonight. I don't believe we have an ecological crisis. We have an existential crisis. I don't believe that we have challenges. I believe we have opportunities. I believe that every action, every investment has impact. Don't tell me if you're a large bank, you just set up an impact fund. What are you doing with the rest of your money, right? I also believe that if we get it right and we are inclusive, blended value creates superior returns. And we've got to get away from this notion of trade-offs. If we do good, we can't do as well. I also believe that there's reasons to be a techno-optimist, even if one is not a techno-determinist. And I also believe we're not in chaos in the world, that we can make sense of what's happening. And it is the end of the beginning and not the beginning of the end. Energy is a metaphor for all of this, but energy challenge we have cannot be solved in isolation of the broader context and challenges we face. So here we are. 2 years ago, probably like me, everybody here was dialed into the World Geological Congress taking place in Cape Town and ignoring the Olympics. Now, for the 3 or 4 of you that weren't, I'll be happy to share what the world's geologists decided, because it was a one-time offer, first time in 12,000 years they were able to make this announcement. So the world's geologists had gotten together, like the IPCC, and had this epic collaborative scientific inquiry into where we are as a species on this planet and where the planet is geologically. And lo and behold, the announcement came out, we are in a new geological era. Now, that happened around the same time as Usain Bolt won the 100 meters. So, okay, a few of us missed that. But basically, we human beings are now the defining force of nature. This started 200 years ago, but it's now confirmed that we are the defining force of nature. That's an astonishing realization for a species that literally came out of the caves less than 10,000 years ago in a world and in a cosmos made up of trillions and billions of light years and years. So here we are. Now, the consequences are massive, and they're not just related to climate change. In fact, climate change is really but a symptom of a much bigger set of challenges. So, for example, last summer, the IUCN, the world's largest collaborative environmental organization, announced that since I was 17, i.e. 41 years, 50% of the animals on this planet have been eliminated. Since I was a teenager, we've wiped out half the living animals on this planet. So if we think climate change is the only challenge, it's obviously not. More recently, thanks to political events, thanks to other reasons, we now become much, much more dialed into the social challenges that we have. Fortunately, we now have a framework to which we can understand this. And that framework is called the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you who hadn't heard it before, no, you don't need to go down to the clinic to find out what's going on. So with the SDGs, which I'll come back to in a second, we now have to realize that the challenges are exponential. They're not linear. And most of us who are parents have done a disservice to our children by teaching them how to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when we know that whether it's credit card debt or biological challenges on the planet or climate or whatever, we should really count in exponential terms. In other words, 0, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, etc. So if the challenges are exponential, so must be the solutions. Earlier today, I read about something coming out of the MIT Technology Review that said even though clean energy, as Merran and others have reminded us, is growing rapidly, over 50% of all new CapEx into the energy space is now in renewables, we're only getting there at 1/10 of the pace that we need to go. We need a gigawatt of clean energy every day on this planet, and we're getting 100 megawatts. So we have to take it up to a whole new level. So then as Canadians, we go, well, hang on, we're 35 million people on a planet of 8 billion. Our prosperity cannot be divorced from the bigger challenge of what we've got. So we have to think radically differently. We have to go from me to we. We cannot say, Mom, I'm late because I'm stuck in the traffic, without realizing I am the traffic. We have to realize that language that we've developed is no longer helpful. So if you look at English literature, before the Industrial Revolution, the word waste did not exist. And in many languages in the world, the word waste still does not exist. So we have to reinvent how we see the possibilities of the world. So we now have this thing called the SDGs, which is a wonderful framework. And for those of us who are aware of the forerunner to the SDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, nobody paid attention to that. But many of us are now aware of the SDGs, and you'll see this pin on me and a bunch of other people that beautifully represents the circle. And I'll come back to what I think a circle means and why the world actually makes more sense right now than is sometime apparent in the media. So the SDGs, okay, we've got 17 goals: women's equality, education for all, affordable housing, what have you. We're not going to get to the SDGs operating in series or in parallel. We're not going to get to a clean energy future unless we build the right kind of housing for people, unless we solve for things like food waste, which, by the way, if food waste was a country, would be the third largest source of GHGs in the world. But turning challenges into opportunities, we now see that over the next 15 years, we fully engage with the SDGs. This is a $15 to $20 trillion market. $15 to $20 trillion market, and that's without a meaningful price on carbon. I've already identified over 30, 40, maybe even 50 companies that we call unicorns, i.e. companies worth $1 billion that are dialed into the SDGs. Affordable housing alone can create 400 million jobs in the world. There is lots to be done, and there's huge prizes to be won. So we have the means. We understand technological change is immense, and it's happening at warp speed. But what does it really mean in terms of achieving our goals? Well, if you have zero marginal cost, you can spread benefits. You go from a paradigm of scarcity to abundance. If a kid from Cameroon can win the Google coding contest, then how do we unlock the ingenuity that resides wherever and whenever opportunity gives it a chance? How do we bake in things like AI or machine learning? How do we bake in blockchain? How do we use 3D printing to solve for the SDGs? I believe this is the opportunity for Canada. Many of my friends in Silicon Valley, because I'm a venture capitalist, would not know we have more AI startups in Canada than Silicon Valley. The recent federal budget has amped up our spending on science by a record amount, 25%. So what? Who cares? If AI does not stand for augmented impact, then what does it matter? If blockchain is just going to be a cryptocurrency that we can make or lose money with, who cares? But if blockchain can get money to farmers in Africa while bypassing corruption and middle people, awesome. So we've got to be intentional. We've got to move beyond unicorns and our fascination with wealth creation to a new concept, and I would call that zebras. Zebras are real, unlike unicorns. They have both profit and purpose. Hopefully they can't be weaponized. And the coolest thing of all about zebras is that when you pull them all together, a group of zebras is called a dazzle. That's awesome. So we've got the solutions. We've just come through a generation of startup mania. There's endless accelerators, endless hubs, endless hackathons. We don't need new ideas. We need to scale up the ideas we've got. And that means pulling together capital in many different forms, both financial capital, but non-financial capital. Indigenous knowledge, as has been mentioned, human capital, relationship capital. We've got to pull stuff into the market, and we've got to have large companies and small companies and lots of different players. And fortunately, many of those exist. So let me give you an example of what I'm really talking about here, and I'll use solar as the example. I've been fortunate to be active in the solar industry, coming on 20 years. When we did the second ever solar IPO on NASDAQ in 2001, there was 0.5 gigawatt of solar installed worldwide, and I think Chile alone is doing 13 gigawatts this year. When we went around Wall Street to amp up the analysts and we talked about PV, they kept saying, we don't see any present value in this. And we went, okay, back to the drawing board with the PowerPoints. But in 20 years, the price of solar has dropped 200 times. In the last 5 years, by 80%. It's now the cheapest form of energy for over 80% of the planet. And we're seeing power purchase agreements of 2 cents a kilowatt hour coming to the fore in places like Saudi Arabia, Texas, and all the places that have brought us the energy system that we have today. So it's no surprise that we've seen a 50x growth in adoption of solar. But what's most interesting is that the International Energy Agency has, to enormous credit, managed to get their projections on what prices and what market adoption of solar is going to be consistently wrong for a record-breaking 27 years. And by the way, Annette, they're doing the same thing in storage right now. So we don't see the future coming. Why? Because we think linearly, we don't think exponentially. So what about those SDGs? How are we going to achieve them, and do we have the means to get there? Well, let me carry on a little bit with, I'm just looking at the time clock here. It's pretty nerve-wracking to see it going along like that. You can cut that out of the audio, of the recording. So let me give you 2 examples from the solar field, because solar in itself is not enough. Solar is not the solution. Clean energy is not the solution. But solar applied to real human challenges is a solution. So let me take a company in Nairobi, Kenya, called M-Kopa. There are a bunch of other companies like M-Kopa out there now, but M-Kopa was founded on a really interesting insight that wasn't possible 5 or even 10 years ago or 5 years ago. 50% of Kenyans use mobile payment systems. Many of them don't even have bank accounts. So combine cheap solar with mobile payment systems, you can suddenly get the rural population that has not got a snowball's chance in hell of getting onto the grid, of getting off kerosene, which is what most poor people in Africa use. It's dirty, it's expensive, it's dangerous. So with M-Kopa technology, you have pay-as-you-go approach. So you can adopt a solar panel for less than what it would cost you to pay for kerosene, but because you have mobile payment systems, it gets you over the upfront capital cost. And by the way, once you're a good credit risk, would you like a clean cook stove? Would you like an advance on school fees? Would you like an even bigger solar panel so you can watch Manchester United on Saturdays, etc.? Everybody in Africa is a Man U fan. So 80% of the employees of M-Kopa are women. And when you don't have kerosene, you don't have to take your daughter out of the school for a day a week so she can go into the village and charge the mobile phone and then be at a competitive disadvantage to her male counterparts trying to get into college or university or finish high school. This is a great example of what we can do today that we couldn't do 5, 10, 20 years ago. Similar example, a company in Oakland, California called Solar Mosaic. They started out thinking they were going to bring crowdfunding to community solar projects. Kind of cute, they're not going to make a lot of money out of that. Fast forward, after 4 years of being in business, they're now the largest solar home lender in North America. They've got a book of about $2 billion worth of business. And now, because they know what they're doing, they're going into work with Indigenous communities, they're going into work with other underserved communities. They have the know-how, they have the financial muscle to get the job done and to bring people into the 21st century economy. So we can have exponential impact, but it's not just about solving for carbon. Now, the second challenge we have in thinking this through is that often the best ideas are in one place, but the opportunities and needs are in another place. In other words, many of the ideas and solutions are in the Western world, I'm over time, and the needs and the opportunities are in the global South or in China. So, in closing, what I think we need to do as Canadians is we need to harness our ability to develop great technology in AI, blockchain, and traditional clean tech, have a global view, take it cross-border, solve for problems that the world wants to solve, and build brand Canada on that basis. I think that's all I've got to say today, but what I really want to close with is we've come out of the world thinking it's like this, right? We're in silos, we're in government departments, and then we develop platforms, which I think are flat forms. Now we have to think this way. And so if we want to make sense of Me Too, yes, it's about banning harassment in the workplace, but most importantly, it's about bringing the feminization, the holistic thinking that we're going to need to solve the real challenges of our time and to prosper as a consequence. Thank you.
You heard it at the Walrus Talks first. Unicorns aren't real. Like, oh my God, that's amazing. This is our lovely friend, our presenting sponsor, Suncor, the Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer, Eric Axford. He's going to say a few words to you, but we're going to first together, and I hope you will join us in thanking all of our talkers, Chris Turner, Cheryl Cardinal, Colton Kasteel, Merran Smith, Leor Rotchild, Annette Verschuren, and Nick Parker. Thank you all. And here's Eric.
Well,
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. It truly is great to be here, and I too want to acknowledge the being in the traditional territories here of the Coast Salish peoples. There's been an Indigenous theme here tonight that's very important for all of us to recognize, so thank you for that. You know, it is interesting on the heels of the Globe Conference here to be here, and I'd just like to say a few things that I picked up listening to the different speakers tonight. I'm actually not speaking as part of the speaking lineup, just thanking everyone. But, you know, it's quite clear energy matters. That's why Suncor's here. We're Canada's largest energy company, and I think you heard from everyone tonight about triple bottom line thinking, long-term thinking, sustainable development goals, and integrated thinking. And, you know, a little bit of a debate about linear thinking versus circular thinking and stuff like that, too. At Suncor, we like to say that we create energy for a better world. That's actually our vision, which we try to say to create purpose. And of course, we got a lot of engineers in the company, and we had quite a debate when we came up with that tagline, because you can imagine the linear response to that tagline. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. How can we create energy for a better world? And then you realize energy is not only a noun, but energy is a verb as well. And we like to think of it in all kinds of different contexts, and we do think it's an inspiring mission to create energy for a better world. We heard from every one of our speakers tonight concepts of the triple bottom line. We heard from every one of our speakers tonight concepts of actually people and leadership making the difference, not just strategy and policy. You have to have some good strategy and policy out there, but execution trumps strategy and policy every time, and people are what cause that action. So I think every one of our speakers touched that. Innovation and collaboration, huge theme of everyone out there. And what I really took away that I liked was a real message of purpose, hope, and inspiration, with the exception of a few kind of bad memories from Mad Max movies early in our presentation. It was a pretty, you know, pretty purposeful, hopeful, and optimistic view of the future by everyone here. And part of that is actually, you know, being in Canada. I think all the speakers also noted how Canada actually has a unique and differentiated contribution to make here. And we actually have a special opportunity for that. So, you know, the whole spirit of recognizing that energy matters to each and every one of us, and that it's really vital that we collaborate and work together on that energy transition and that better energy future instead of fighting it is just such a critical theme. So thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to also thank Shelley, whatever happened to Shelley back here, and David and others at the Walrus Foundation. We have had at least a 5-year relationship with the Walrus Group, and they're always interesting sessions like this. I've been fortunate to participate in many. Would like to thank Globe and the Vancouver Convention Center for hosting tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric and Nicole and everyone from Suncor. As I mentioned, this is our 91st Walrus Talks. That means, as I said, there are over 600 7-minute, or in the case of Nick, 11-minute Walrus Talks for you to watch on YouTube whenever or wherever you want. So just go to thewalrus.ca/video. You can also subscribe to the Walrus magazine at thewalrus.ca, but there is no reason to actually do that because tonight, Blair is out there at a table, Blair from the Walrus, collecting new walrus. That's what we call you all, and we know it's not a word. New walrus. Tonight, for just $20, you get a full year of the Walrus. That's 10 issues delivered to your door the old-fashioned way. So get out there and subscribe to the Walrus and be our favorite people. And you can also sign up for our newsletter there, which is not annoying. It just comes every once in a while in your inbox and tells you where the Walrus Talks is in the country so that you can come out and join us. Thank you to our national partners, Inspire, Shaw, and Cirque. They are with us wherever we go. Thank you to Chris Henderson, Mike Gerbus, and the entire Globe team for having us back. We'd like you all to join us at the post-talks reception over there when the lights go on. As I said, there is food and there is drink. And if you are there, there will also be good conversation, because the truth is, you are the Walrus. Thank you for coming.